In the last video, we saw some of the basics of inheritance. We also saw some visibility rules, and also in the coding examples, we did look at protected visibility, and we don't really talk about that in these visibility rules just because there are so many rules that they're hard to keep track of. Realize that, but eventually, as Java programmers, you want to be aware and be able to use all of these visibility rules. So we just see a handful here. We went through a bunch of these rules. We said that subclass can override the public methods of the superclass. However, this definition only applies only to the objects of the subclass and not to objects of the superclass. What is all this saying? It's pretty straightforward if you actually look at the code. If you were to take an instance, let's take a look at, let's close some of these old classes that we looked at in the previous video. Let's take a look at an example here. I have a class A. Class B extends A, so remember, inheritance means that you can use polymorphism. So if you have a variable that's of type A, that is this uppercase A, you can create a new object of type B and assign it to that variable which is of type A. That's polymorphism basically. That's just a simple instance where our polymorphism works. Now polymorphism is more than just that, but that's a good starting point. Okay, so in this example it's kind of involved. I do have two classes, A and B. I have a public method for print1, public method print2, which calls a private method, and then I have a public final method called printFinal, which I call just to give you an example of final methods, and then a static method as well. Okay, so in B, which extends the A class, I override the print1 method. So notice I'm going to go back here. There's a print1 method of A. I have a print1 method in B. All it does is print b.print1 instead of a.print1. So these are the kinds of things that you can expect in quizzes. I'll give you a class with a method like this, and then I'll call various methods and ask you what it prints. Here is a print private method. It overrides this print private method in class A. Now you might ask, well, can I make this private in class B? No, you can't. That Java does not allow you that. If you have a method that you want to override in a subclass, B is the subclass, this has to be public, this has to be public. Or else this has to be private for in the case of print private, and then you can make this private. Okay, so this public final method means that you cannot override this method in subclasses. So B cannot have a public even if it's final or not final, public final void print final. You just cannot do that down here. You just cannot have any method in any subclass of A override this print final method. You can have static methods like print3, and you can override that in class B, which is the subclass. Okay, so once I set up these two classes, I have a main method where I use all these classes. I say A is equal to new A, that is, which is creating an A object. It's referred to by a variable of type A. It's very straightforward. And you call the print1, print2, and print3 method. You might want to go through this example, make sure you understand why it prints what it does. I'm not going to go through it just because it gets pretty involved. I'm just going to, you want to take the time and step through, ideally using the debugger, or at least take a look at the output of this program. So for the very first case, for the A object, which is really straightforward, everything is just normal. A.print1, it calls A.printPrivate, it calls a.print3 and a.printFinal. Now, change things around. I create a B object, but the actual type of the variable is A. When you do that, you get slightly different output. Okay, so here it is. I'm using polymorphism. And then when you print out, I'm going to ignore these instance of things. I'm just going to look at the print. And you say b.print1. Sure enough, you get the public b.print1 method. However, when you call print2, and let me just go back and show you what print2 does. Print2 is way back here. It comes from class A. It is called print private. So you might think if the B object calls print2, it inherits this print2 method because B extends A. So B has a print2 method. If it calls print private, should it print a.print private? And sure enough, it actually does. Take a look here. It says private method a.print private. Even though you do have a print private method here, it's not getting used because we call this public method print2, which calls print private. And this is one of the things that's explained here in this rule. A subclass can override the public methods of the superclass. And this redefinition only applies to the subclass, not to the object of the superclass. And this, I guess it really doesn't say, but it is not, in this case, overriding that private method. Or at least there's no way for us to access that private method in B. So let me just point out the problem again, or no, it's not a problem. This is how Java works. You call b.print2. So print2, we haven't overridden here. It's over here. And you might say, well, this print private, I'm not really sure what it's going to call. Is it going to call this A print private, or will it call the B print private? It turns out it is the A print private. Okay. And you also see a warning here. It says the method print private from the type B is never used locally. So there's no way to refer to it. Now, if you were to override this print2 method right here in B, then you could use print private of B. So if you override print2 in B, you can use this print private method of B. And then the static method works. If you take a look at this, the last thing we do with B is we call print3. We also call printFinal, but when you call the print3 method, since B is of type A, it will call the static method that's of type A. So when you say b.print3, does it go here? No. Even though you have a B object, it actually goes over here and prints out this message. How can you get this thing to be printed? You have to have that variable that's of type B. You have to have a variable like this, bb, which is of type B, and you create a B object. You call the bb.print3, and then you do get it to print the static method b.print3. So there's a lot of stuff in here. You really have to step through all of this code and see the differences between using a variable like bb, which is of type B, and you create a B object, as opposed to the B object, which is of type A, but we're actually creating a B object. Okay. So this is all polymorphism. This is all like fine points. And if you use inheritance, you do have to worry about these things. What kinds of, are you doing overloading? Are you overriding? Are you really using the methods of the subclass or the superclass. All those things are things you have to worry about, and you'll get used to it. It's not horrible. Once you get used to it, you will remember these rules. So it just becomes, with practice, it's easy. Okay. Another rule that we want to look at: all data members of the superclass are also data members of the subclass. So even if they're private, they are data members of the subclass. So similarly, all methods of the superclass are also methods of the subclass. So data members and methods, whether they're private, they're protected, they are actually methods of the subclass. They may not be visible. If you call a method, depending on how you set up the variables and all that, you might get methods of the superclass executing instead of methods of the subclass. Okay, so like I said, these are just basic rules, and there are so many examples we could go through. I would really suggest that you go through these examples very slowly, very carefully, because there's a lot of nice features of the object-oriented programming in these examples. Okay, so when accessing a superclass method within a subclass, you can call the method of a superclass explicitly by saying super dot. So you can use this dot method name, or you can use super dot method name. This dot method name would refer to the method for the current class, and if you use super, you can explicitly call a method in the superclass. Now, why would you want to do this? This happens, let's say, if the subclass overrides the public method of a superclass, then you might say, well, you overridden the class that you inherited, so now you're forced to use this new method in the subclass. Well, that's true, but you can specifically call the public method of the superclass if you use super. If the subclass does not override a public method of the superclass, you can just call the public method of the superclass using this method name. So, for example, what's a good example of that? Print2 is not overridden here in the B class. So I have a print2 in the A class. B extends A, it's not overridden. So if I needed to call print2, I could just call in here, I could call print2 somewhere in here. And if I specifically wanted to call a method from the superclass, I would just, let's say I want to do that here, I could just call super dot print1. So let's just try that just real quick. Super dot print1, and this will print out a dot public method a dot print1, same as over here. So let's just try that real quick, save it and run it. And there's so many things you can experiment with in this example. I just showed you a few things, few features very quickly. So here it is, there it is. You call b.print1, and then in here you specifically call the same method that you're overriding here. You can do that. You can say super.print1, and sure enough, here's the output, public method a.print1. And then after that, you do a system.out.println, public method b.print1. Here it is. Okay, there's a million other things you could do. This is just a couple of short things that I thought that I would put in. Okay. So let's say we have a class rectangle, and we set up, and it has length and width. Typically what we do is we set up, let's say, a class that extends this. So let's say a box, which is a three-dimensional object. Not only does it have a length and a width, but also a height. So you'd make this private, just like you made length and width private. In addition to area and perimeter, in this case, you would have volume. Area would be the surface area, and so on. So this kind of structure I'm hoping you are familiar with and it makes sense to you. We'll build on this in the next couple of videos.